Think you can bully this simple driver, officer? Wrong. You just shot Marcus Cole. Living, Pentagon, commander, asset. Retribution starts now. Vance thought he could hide the body, but the shadows just became the hunter. The United States Armed Forces has entered the chat. His eternity begins.
The red and blue lights flashed against the black asphalt of Highway 9 as Officer Greg Vance adjusted his heavy leather gun belt and stepped out of his cruiser into the sweltering southern heat. Vance had patrolled this desolate stretch of dusty road for 15 years, and in his mind, he ruled it like an absolute tyrant. He had a particular disdain for anyone who did not fit his extremely narrow, prejudiced view of who belonged in his quiet county. Tonight his target was a sleek black SUV with dark tinted windows and expensive out-of-state plates. Vance spit a thick wad of tobacco onto the dirt shoulder and walked with a heavy, arrogant stride toward the driver's side of the vehicle, his hand already resting on the cold grip of his sidearm. Inside that vehicle sat Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole of the United States Army Tier 1 Special Operations. Cole was a highly decorated combat veteran, a man who had survived brutal firefights in the most hostile territories on Earth, and who currently held one of the highest classified security clearances inside the Pentagon. He was driving alone on his way to a highly sensitive midnight briefing at a nearby tactical military installation. Cole calmly pressed the button to roll down his window, revealing a stoic, disciplined face that had stared down actual warlords and terrorists. "Good evening, Officer Cole," said, his deep voice completely steady and respectful, lacking even a hint of the nervousness Vance usually fed upon. Vance lifted his heavy tactical flashlight and shined the blinding beam directly into Cole's eyes, purposefully trying to provoke a reaction. "I did not ask for a greeting, boy," Vance snapped harshly, his grip tightening on his service weapon in anticipation of conflict. "Hand over your license and registration right now before I drag you out through this window." Cole squinted against the harsh glare but remained perfectly composed, refusing to take the bait. "My credentials are in my left breast pocket, officer, and I am going to reach for them very slowly," Cole explained, demonstrating the kind of flawless de-escalation discipline that only decades of elite military training could forge. Vance felt a hot flash of irrational anger at Cole's unbothered and professional tone. Vance wanted fear. He demanded complete submission from the people he pulled over. "I said give me your damn license," Vance barked loudly, unclipping the retention strap on the holster of his gun. "Step out of the vehicle right this second, and keep your hands where I can see them." Cole sighed internally, knowing exactly how this tragic script usually played out with crooked small-town cops who thought a badge made them gods, but he also knew the proper legal protocol. He carefully unbuckled his seatbelt, keeping his empty hands in plain sight above the steering wheel, and stepped out into the humid, oppressive night air. He towered over Vance, standing a solid 6'3" with shoulders carved from granite and the undeniable posture of a combat leader. The sheer physical presence of the colonel made Vance feel instantly inadequate, and that inadequacy rapidly boiled over into lethal aggression. Vance backed up a step and completely drew his firearm, pointing the barrel directly at Cole's chest. "Get on the ground now," Vance screamed, spit flying from his lips as his finger tightened dangerously on the sensitive trigger. Cole raised both of his hands slowly to head level, palms open to show he was unarmed. "Officer, you are making a terrible mistake right now, because I am an active-duty lieutenant colonel and you are unlawfully interfering with federal orders," Cole said firmly, his eyes locking onto Vance's panicked gaze. "Shut your mouth," Vance yelled, completely ignoring the warning words. He was blinded by his own deep-seated prejudice and the pathetic, fragile need to assert dominance over a man who clearly outclassed him in every conceivable way. Without any provocation, without any sudden movement or threat from Cole whatsoever, Vance panicked and squeezed the trigger. The deafening gunshot echoed loudly through the empty highway, shattering the peaceful silence of the rural night. Cole felt the searing, hot, kinetic impact of the bullet tear brutally through his left shoulder, spinning his large frame around and dropping him hard to the dusty asphalt. Dark red blood immediately began to pool around his crisp button-down uniform shirt, staining the fabric. He gritted his teeth in agony, but refused to give Vance the sick satisfaction of hearing him cry out in pain. Vance stood over the bleeding officer, smirking arrogantly as the thin wisps of smoke cleared from the black barrel of his gun. The suspect resisted arrest and reached for a concealed weapon. Vance muttered quietly to himself, already rehearsing the exact lie he had told a dozen times before to the corrupt local internal affairs board. He casually reached for his shoulder radio and called dispatch in a fake, panicked voice. Shots fired, officer requires immediate assistance. Send an ambulance, the suspect attacked me. Vance felt totally secure in his protective bubble of institutional corruption. He had the shiny badge, he had the full backing of his equally crooked chief, and in this dead-end town his word was treated like absolute gospel. But Vance did not know who he had just shot and left bleeding on the road. He did not know that Cole's specialized government vehicle was equipped with a classified Pentagon satellite uplink that automatically began broadcasting live encrypted audio and high-definition video directly to a secure server in Washington, D.C. the very second Vance's police sirens had activated. 500 miles away, in the deep, reinforced underground bunkers of the Pentagon, a massive red alarm suddenly flashed on a main console in the Tactical Operations Command Center. A young intelligence technician dropped his hot coffee, scrambling frantically to put on his audio headset. "Sir, we have a Tier 1 Code Black emergency signal," the technician yelled across the busy room to 4-star General Arthur Miller. Miller, a battle-scarred and ruthless commander who viewed Marcus Cole like a blood sun, walked over rapidly with heavy combat boots sounding like thunder on the linoleum floor. "Put the feed on the main screen now," Miller commanded, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. The entire huge operations center went dead silent as the crisp dashcam footage and the cabin audio played out in shocking clarity on the massive digital wall display. Every single tactical officer, 4-star general, and data analyst watched in pure paralyzing horror and fast-boiling rage as they witnessed the completely unprovoked attempted murder of one of their most prized field commanders. They watched the arrogant cop stand over the bleeding hero, rehearsing his pathetic and transparent lie. The silence in the underground command center was so absolute and heavy that you could hear a pin drop before the apocalyptic storm finally broke. General Miller's weathered face turned to solid stone, but his piercing eyes were burning with a cold, calculated fury that promised absolute and merciless destruction. "Get the President of the United States on the secure line right now and scramble a full Black Hawk assault squadron," Miller said, his voice deadly low but echoing ominously off the concrete walls. "No local involvement, no FBI jurisdiction, no civilian red tape, and no mercy, because this is a direct military attack on the armed forces of this country, and I am personally declaring federal martial jurisdiction over that entire backwater county." The heavy, unstoppable wheels of military retribution began to turn instantly, with lethal efficiency. Back in the small, dusty town, Officer Vance was leaning comfortably against the hood of his cruiser, sipping a lukewarm gas station coffee, while ignorant paramedics loaded the unconscious, bleeding Cole into the back of a waiting ambulance. The local police chief, a heavy-set, corrupt man named Barrett, walked up and patted Vance hard on the back. "Do not worry about a single thing, Greg, my boy. We will just say he was high and aggressive. We got your back forever," Chief Barrett said with a slimy, confident smile. Vance chuckled loudly and took another relaxed sip of his coffee, feeling truly like the untouchable king of the world. They happily drove back to the main precinct station, a run-down brick building that served as the dark heart of their sick little local empire. Vance sat at his cluttered desk, kicking his heavy boots up on the wood and slowly typing out his completely fabricated incident report. He wrote elaborate lies about fearing for his life, about the suspect's aggressive posturing, and about the invisible deadly weapon he swears to God he saw in the shadows. He was just about to smugly hit the save button when every single light in the precinct flickered violently and died all at once. The entire brick building was instantly plunged into pitch-black, blinding darkness. "What in the hell is going on with the backup generator?" Vance shouted, annoyed, standing up quickly and grabbing his heavy flashlight from the desk. Before anyone in the room could even answer, a low, terrifying rumbling sound began to shake the very concrete foundation of the building. It started as a distant thumping vibration, but extremely quickly escalated into a deafening mechanical roar that rattled their bones. Chunks of dust and plaster fell from the old ceiling as the thick glass windows rattled violently in their metal frames. Chief Barrett ran panicking to the front lobby door and peeked through the plastic blinds, his jaw dropping open in absolute mind-numbing terror. "My God Almighty," Barrett whispered hoarsely, his entire body trembling like a leaf. Vance pushed roughly past his chief to look out the window, and the hot blood instantly froze solid in his veins. Hovering just 50 feet above the precinct's small parking lot were 6 massive military Black Hawk helicopters, their blinding white aerial searchlights cutting through the night fog like surgical blades of sunlight. Dozens of heavily armed elite special forces tactical operators were rappelling down thick rope lines, hitting the asphalt below with flawless, synchronized military precision. They were dressed in full, impenetrable black tactical gear, green laser sights cutting through the thick darkness and aiming directly at the front doors of the corrupt precinct. Vance dropped his flashlight to the floor, his hand shaking uncontrollably as he stupidly reached for his holster, a pitiful suicidal instinct that would likely get his head blown off in mere seconds. Before he could even unclip his weapon, the heavy wooden reinforced front doors of the police station were blown completely off their steel hinges with a massive shattering explosion of C4 plastic explosives that sent both Vance and Barrett flying backward through the air and crashing hard across the lobby tile floor. Thick choking smoke filled the entire room as shadowy, heavily armed figures flooded in from every direction, suppressed tactical rifles raised high, and blinding strobe lights disorienting every single corrupt cop in the building. "Get on the ground now, do not move a single muscle or you are dead," a deep voice boomed loudly through the thick smoke, sounding exactly like a lethal soldier preparing to wage total war. Vance lay flat on his back, his ears ringing, horribly coughing on the thick gray dust and debris clouding his lungs. He looked up through watering eyes to see the cold steel barrel of a modified M4 assault rifle pressed directly and hard between his eyes. Standing tall over his pathetic form was a large man in a crisp, decorated military dress uniform, flanked closely by 4 ghostly operators with their weapons drawn tight. It was General Arthur Miller, his heavy boots crunching loudly over the shattered broken glass as he looked down at the cowering Vance with a look of total, unadulterated disgust. "Gregory Vance," the powerful general said, his tone as cold as shaved ice. "You have just ignorantly declared war on the United States Army by attempting to cowardly assassinate my best commanding officer, and tonight your cheap little tin badge means absolutely nothing to any of us." Vance tried desperately to speak, tried to beg and defend his pathetic actions, but the cowardly words dried up completely in his dry throat as 2 huge, muscular military operators grabbed him violently by both arms and dragged him to his feet, lifting his body entirely off the floor so his boots dangled in the air. "You are no longer a citizen, you are now the classified property of the federal government," General Miller stated coldly, turning on his heel to walk out the destroyed door. "Prepare the black sites interrogation rooms, boys, because we are just getting started with you, Officer Vance, and I am going to ensure you experience every ounce of pain you have ever inflicted on innocent people before this night is over, so you better start praying to a God that is no longer listening." The deafening chopping sound of the massive Black Hawk rotors completely drowned out Greg Vance's pitiful pleas for mercy as he was brutally thrown headfirst into the cold metal floor of the military helicopter. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, so tightly that his fingers had already gone numb, and a thick black hood was pulled roughly over his head, blinding him to the world he used to terrorize. 2 gigantic tactical operators sat on either side of him, their heavy knees pressing crushingly into Vance's ribs to keep him pinned down like a captured animal. He could smell the sharp metallic scent of gun oil, a stark contrast to the cheap coffee he was enjoying just minutes ago. Terror, true bone-chilling terror, pumped through his veins like ice water. He tried to scream for his corrupt chief, but his mouth was instantly gagged by a rough leather strap pulled taut across his teeth by one of the faceless soldiers. Below them, the dusty little town was rapidly fading into the darkness, leaving behind only a smoking ruined shell of a police precinct and dozens of dirty cops stripped of their badges. The blind flight lasted exactly 47 torturous minutes before the heavy chopper banked sharply and began a rapid descent toward a highly classified underground black site bunker located deep beneath a remote, undisclosed mountain range. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, at the highly secure Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole was being wheeled frantically down a brightly lit sterile hallway surrounded by a swarm of trauma surgeons. The cowardly assassination attempt had done massive and catastrophic damage to the hero. Vance's bullet had completely shattered Cole's collarbone and deeply pierced his left lung, causing severe internal bleeding that would have killed any lesser man. But Cole was forged in the unforgiving fires of Tier 1 warfare. His heart rate monitor beeped erratically as nurses cut away his blood-soaked military uniform, revealing a broad chest covered in old faded battle scars from classified missions in Afghanistan and Syria. "Stay with US, Colonel. Do not dare let some cheap street thug be the one who finally takes you out," the lead surgeon yelled, frantically barking rapid orders for O-negative blood transfusions and immediate emergency chest tubes. Back at the classified black site, the assault helicopter landed with a heavy rattling thud, and Vance was yanked upward by his collar, his cheap boots barely scraping the tarmac as he was dragged mercilessly down a long, echoing concrete tunnel. He heard heavy reinforced steel doors clanging shut loudly behind him, with a sickening finality sealing him off from the civilian world forever. He was tossed violently into a solid steel interrogation chair that was bolted to the floor, and his ankles and wrists were immediately shackled with extremely heavy iron chains. The thick black hood was suddenly ripped from his sweating head, and the tight leather gag was unbuckled, allowing him to gasp raggedly for the freezing air, snot and tears running down his face. Blinking rapidly against the harsh, blinding fluorescent lights, Vance found himself sitting in a bare concrete interrogation room with no mirrors, no windows, and absolutely no clocks. Sitting directly across from him at a small scarred metal table was General Arthur Miller. The imposing four-star general had removed his dress coat, revealing a crisp, white shirt with the sleeves rolled up past his elbows, exposing thick, muscular forearms. Standing silently behind Miller like statues of death were two enormous, ghostly operators holding suppressed tactical weapons, their identities completely concealed behind thick black balaclavas. "You have exactly one chance to explain to me why you attempted to murder one of my finest commanding officers in cold blood," Miller said, his deep, gravelly voice calm, but laced with a lethal venom. Vance trembled uncontrollably, his frail, pathetic cop ego trying desperately to reassert itself through the crushing, paralyzing fear. "I told Border Dispatch he was aggressive," Vance stammered out, his voice cracking pathetically like a frightened child. "He refused to comply with my lawful orders." He reached quickly for his waistband. "I thought he had a concealed gun, General. I swear to Almighty God, I was fearing for my life. It was 100% by the book." The damp room went deadly silent for 3 long, terrifying seconds before General Miller slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. He placed it deliberately on the metal table and pressed a single green button. The digital screen flashed to life, playing the high-definition live satellite footage from Cole's dashcam in crystal clear color and enhanced audio. Vance watched in absolute sickening horror as the glowing screen replayed the entire traumatic encounter exactly as it happened, sans lies. He heard his own arrogant, prejudiced voice barking unlawful commands, he heard Cole's calm professional de-escalation protocols, and he watched himself cowardly pull his weapon and fire directly into the chest of a man who had his empty hands raised in pure peace. The terrifying video kept playing, showing Vance standing over the bleeding American hero practicing his pathetic little lies while smirking arrogantly into the darkness. Vance's jaw dropped open, trembling uncontrollably as his entire manufactured reality completely collapsed around him in real time. That vehicle was a high-value government asset linked directly to a secure military satellite network. "You absolute pathetic moron," Miller whispered, dangerously leaning forward until his hard face was mere inches from Vance's profusely sweating forehead. "We heard every single syllable, we saw every tiny movement, and we recorded your pitiful little rehearsal over his bleeding innocent body." Vance began to weep uncontrollably, real salty tears of absolute despair streaming rapidly down his red, flushed cheeks as he begged and pleaded for a mercy he had never granted anyone else. "Please, General, please, I made a terrible mistake. I did not know who he was. I will do anything. I will sign a full confession. Just do not kill me," he sobbed hysterically, pulling uselessly at his heavy iron chains. You do not get the privilege to confess, Miller replied, standing up slowly and methodically, buttoning his shirt cuffs with icy calm. You are not going to some comfortable civilian prison where you can hide safely in protective custody with the rest of the disgraced dirty badges. You unjustifiably shot a Tier 1 military operator who was actively carrying highly classified national security intelligence, which legally makes you an unlawful enemy.
Combat and engage in active domestic terrorism against the state. Miller turned slowly to the two ghostly, faceless operators and nodded once with his head. Prepare him immediately for the deep water protocol, Miller ordered coldly as he walked heavily toward the steel door without looking back. Van Cest's eyes widened in uncomprehending raw horror as the unrestrained wrath of the United States military black operations team, as the room lights faded to red for the real terror, to finally begin .2 giants step forward uniformly pulling thick black waterboarding towels and medical restraints from their tactical vests. No, wait, please, what is the deep water protocol? Please God, no, Van screamed, thrashing wildly and pathetically in his bolted chair as the heavy metal door clanged shut, leaving him entirely to the merciless. The icy, freezing water hit Greg Van Cest's lungs like 1,000 tiny razor blades tearing through his chest as he thrashed in total helpless agony against the unyielding leather restraints. The deep water protocol was not an interrogation tactic. It was a meticulously calculated exercise in psychological and physical destruction designed by Tier 1 intelligence operatives to break the human mind into a million shattered pieces. The thick black towel over his face prevented him from breathing, while the relentless pouring water triggered his primal drowning reflex over and over again, sent his pathetic little heart into dangerously rapid palpitations. He felt like he was sinking to the bottom of a pitch-black ocean, crushed beneath the weight of his own arrogance and sickening prejudice. Every time his vision flickered into unconsciousness, the ghostly operators would abruptly yank him back to terrifying reality, only to begin the torturous cycle all over again without a single word spoken. They did not ask him questions because they already knew every single answer. They just wanted him to understand the absolute magnitude of his sins. Hundreds of miles away at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, a far more noble fight for survival was waging in Operating Room 7. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole's massive frame lay, covered in sterile blue drapes, as a highly specialized team of trauma surgeons worked with desperate, frantic speed. The 9mm hollow point bullet fired by the corrupt cop had shattered Cole's clavicle and torn a ragged, bloody hole directly through his left lung, causing a massive tension pneumothorax. The lead surgeon, Dr. Harrison, a veteran who had patched up wounded soldiers in Kabul, squinted through his surgical loops as he tried to clamp a spraying artery. We are losing his blood pressure fast, push another 2 units of O negative, and get the defibrillator charged. Harrison barked, his gloved hands slick with the hero's blood. Suddenly, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor transformed into a dreaded continuous flatline high-pitched tone that froze the blood of every nurse in the room. He is in cardiac arrest, starting compressions. Now a nurse shouted, climbing onto a step stool to push hard and fast on Cole's muscular chest. As his physical body hovered on the very brink of death, Cole's unconscious mind drifted back to the dusty sun-baked streets of Fallujah, where he had once dragged 2 wounded privates through a hail of enemy machine gun fire, refusing to let them die. That same unbreakable titanium willpower, the sheer refusal to surrender to a weaker enemy, sparked deep within his dying neural pathways. Clear, Harrison yelled, placing the heavy shock paddles directly onto Cole's bloody chest. Cole's body convulsed violently off the operating table, but the monitor remained a stubborn flat red line. Charge it to 200 joules. I will be damned if I let this man die because of some trash cop in a backwater highway town. Harrison grunted, shocking him a second time. Back in the Pentagon Secure Operations Bunker, General Arthur Miller stood like a bronze statue, watching the live, encrypted medical feed from Walter Reed. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles were ghostly white. A young aide stepped forward, nervously, holding a red classified folder. Sir, we have run a full digital audit on the entire police department of that county, just as you requested, the aide said, his voice trembling slightly. The systemic corruption is catastrophic, sir. They have been running illegal extortion rings, falsifying evidence, and terrorizing minorities for over 2 decades. Chief Barrett is the architect of the entire operation. General Miller did not even blink as he continued to stare at Cole's flatlining medical feed. Tonight, We do not just punish the dog that bit us, we burn down the entire kennel, Miller stated with chilling finality. Issue a green light directive for Operation Nightfall. Send the tactical black squads to every single home address of those corrupt officers. I want them all ripped from their beds in the dead of night and brought to the black site. Meanwhile, in the quiet, sleepy suburbs of the corrupt county police chief, Barrett was snoring loudly in his plush king-size bed, completely unaware that his entire sick empire had already been incinerated. He thought Vance was safe, he thought his precinct was secure, and he thought he was untouchable. He did not hear the silent military-grade drones circling high above his roof, blocking out all cellular and internet signals in a 5-mile radius. He did not hear the matte black armored tactical vehicles rolling to a silent stop on his manicured lawn. And he certainly did not hear the elite Black Ops breaching team using classified thermal imaging cameras to track his body heat through the brick walls of his mansion. The first indication Barrett had that his life was officially over was the sound of his solid oak front door being ripped from its hinges with silent hydraulic spreader rather than a noisy explosive. 8 shadowy, heavily armed figures moved up his grand staircase with frightening liquid grace, their night vision goggles glowing faintly in the dark. Barrett stirred in his sleep, feeling a sudden icy chill in the bedroom. He slowly opened his crusty eyes and yawned, reaching lazily for the Glock pistol he always kept on his nightstand. But his hand grasped only empty air. His eyes darted to the side and his fat heart nearly burst out his chest in pure shock. Standing completely silently around his bed were 8 Tier 1 military operators, their suppressed rifles aimed directly at his head with a glowing red laser that's resting perfectly on the bridge of his nose. "Do not scream, Chief Barrett," a ghostly voice whispered from the shadows, as a heavy-gloved hand clamped down brutally over his mouth. "Your resignation has just been expedited by the United States Armed Forces, and your new office is a steel cage at the bottom of the earth." Before Barrett could even process the catastrophic reality of his situation, a sharp cold needle pierced the thick skin of his neck. A highly classified military-grade sedative pumped directly into his bloodstream, instantly paralyzing his vocal cords and motor functions. He could only watch in helpless bug-eyed terror as the operators swiftly wrapped him in a heavy canvas restraint bag like a piece of discarded garbage. Across the entire county, this exact same terrifying scene was playing out in total synchronized silence at the homes of 24 other corrupt officers who thought they were above the law. They were being systematically erased from existence without a single neighbor waking up or a single civilian siren sounding. The United States military had completely invaded American soil to surgically excise a cancer that local justice had failed to cure. Back at Walter Reed, the defibrillator screamed once more, and Dr. Harrison hit the button, sending a massive surge of electricity through Marcus Cole's shattered chest. The room held his collective breath as the green line on the monitor paused for one agonizing second before spiking upward into a strong, steady, and defiant heartbeat. "We got him back. He is stabilizing," Harrison gasped, wiping the heavy sweat from his forehead. Marcus Cole had refused to die, but the blood debt demanded by his brothers in arms had only just begun to be paid. In the black site, the horrific torture of Greg Vance continued without mercy. His mind was completely fracturing under the relentless abuse. He screamed into the wet towel, but no sound escaped. He realized with crushing clarity that he was no longer a police officer. He was no longer a citizen. He was simply raw meat in the hands of ghosts. The tall operator finally shut off the water and yanked the towel away, leaving Vance gagging and spitting up gallons of salty water onto his own chest. "Welcome to hell, Gregory," the operator whispered coldly, "and we have only just finished the very first minute of your eternity." The harsh, blinding fluorescent light snapped on with a sickening electrical buzz that pierced directly through Chief Barrett's skull like a rusty spike. He gasped, violently awake, his fat, heavy body thrashing against the unyielding solid steel chains binding his wrists and ankles to a cold concrete wall. He was completely stripped of his expensive tailored suit and left shivering in a thin, ragged orange jumpsuit that clung uncomfortably to his sweating skin. For 20 years, Barrett had ruled his little backwater county like a feudal lord, destroying lives, stealing evidence, and burying innocent people beneath a mountain of fabricated lies. He was a man who demanded absolute fear from the citizens he was sworn to protect, but now, as he stared into the pitch-black shadows of the classified underground black site, he finally understood what true primal terror actually felt like. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped animal as he spit out the lingering metallic taste of the military sedative. "I demand my one phone call," Barrett yelled, his thick voice cracking pathetically to hide his overwhelming panic. "I am the chief of police, and you are committing a massive federal felony. I want my lawyer right now." A deep bone-chilling laugh echoed from the shadows beyond the harsh lighting. Heavy combat boots stepped slowly and methodically onto the bare concrete floor as General Arthur Miller emerged from the darkness, his immaculate dress uniform sharply contrasting with the grim torture chamber. Miller did not look at Barrett with anger. He looked at him with the exact same detached disgust a man might reserve for a cockroach before crushing it beneath his heel. "You still do not realize where you are, do you, Chief?" Miller said, his gravelly voice echoing off the damp walls. "You have no civil rights here, you have no lawyer, and you certainly have no phone call, because as of 2 hours ago you no longer exist in the eyes of the United States government." Barrett scoffed, his fat chin trembling arrogantly despite his shackles. "You cannot just erase me. My men will realize I am gone. The media will tear you apart." Miller simply smirked a cold, predatory grin that sent shivers down Barrett's spine. He reached into his pocket and tossed a thick stack of glossy high-definition photographs onto the dirty floor at Barrett's bare feet. Barrett strained his neck to look down, and his blood ran absolutely cold. The photos showed his 24 corrupt deputies, each one of them bound, gagged, and kneeling in identical dank concrete cells spread throughout this very same underground bunker. They also showed his precinct headquarters reduced to a pile of smoking blackened bricks and rubble. "There's no police force left to look for you," Barrett, Miller whispered, dangerously leaning in close. "We have seized every single penny in your offshore bank accounts. We have confiscated all the dirty cash hidden in your walls. And we have released 15 years of your classified corruption files directly to the FBI. The entire country currently believes you terrorized your own town and then fled the country like a cowardly rat when the feds closed in. You are a ghost, and you will spend the rest of your miserable, rotting existence buried beneath this mountain, praying for a death that I will never grant you." Barrett began to weep hysterically, his frail ego shattering into a million irreparable pieces as a colossal weight of his total destruction crashed down upon him. Hundreds of miles away above ground, the morning sun crept slowly over the quiet, corrupt county, illuminating a scene of unprecedented military occupation. The townsfolk woke up to the rumbling sound of heavy diesel engines as a full convoy of matte black armored Humvees rolled down Main Street. Heavily armed National Guard units flanked by elite Tier 1 operators had established checkpoints at every single intersection. Federal military police officers were stripping down the remains of the obliterated precinct, loading boxes of stolen evidence and corrupt files into massive transport trucks. The citizens peeked through their windows in absolute stunned silence, watching as a reign of terror that had choked their community for decades was surgically excised overnight by an unstoppable apex predator. Martial law had been declared in secret and replaced with something far more ruthless, a total purge of corruption authorized directly by the Pentagon to avenge their fallen hero. Back at Walter Reed Hospital, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole pried his heavy eyes open for the very first time. The pain in his shattered left shoulder was blinding and white-hot, radiating through his chest like a constant electrical burn. He was surrounded by beeping medical monitors and thick, clear tubes draining fluid from his damaged lung, but his mind was as sharp as a razor blade. He blinked, slowly focusing his vision on the tall, decorated figure standing at attention beside his bed. It was a major from Miller's command, his posture ramrod straight, and his eyes filled with deep reverence for the wounded colonel. "Welcome back to the land of the living, sir," the major whispered, gently stepping forward. "It was touch and go for a while there, but General Miller said you were too stubborn to let a dirty cop finish you off." Cole swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. "Give me a status report, Major." He rasped, his voice weak, but commanding. The Major smiled a grim, satisfied smile. "Operation Nightfall was a total success, sir. The entire department has been neutralized, and the shooter is currently enjoying the very bottom floor of the black site. General Miller sends his regards and says a scalpel has been passed directly to you." Cole slowly clenched his uninjured right hand into a tight iron fist, his eyes darkening with a cold, lethal focus that told the Major exactly what was going to happen next. "I want to see him," Cole whispered hoarsely, ignoring the agonizing protests of his shattered body. Get me a wheelchair and a secure video uplink to that interrogation room right now, because I am going to personally watch that trash cop realize exactly whose blood he spilled on that asphalt. Down in the abyss, Greg Vance was hanging limp at a steel chair's body, completely broken by the deep water protocol. His lungs burned, his muscles ached, and he was gagging continuously in the silent darkness. Suddenly, a massive high-definition screen bolted to the far wall flickered to life, bathing his bruised and battered face in a harsh blue glow. Vance slowly raised his heavy head, struggling to keep his swollen eyes open. The screen showed a man in a hospital bed draped in bandages and medical wires. It took Vance's fractured mind a few terrifying seconds to recognize the stoic, unbreakable face of the man he had shot and left for dead. Marcus Cole was staring directly into the camera lens, his gaze piercing through the satellite connection and drilling straight into Vance's rotten soul. "You thought you were the king of the highway," Officer Vance Cole rasped into the microphone, his voice echoing ominously through the damp concrete chamber. "You thought you held fatal strike. They are not going to stop," Vance Cole whispered, chillingly leaning closer to the hospital camera. "In fact, I just gave him the green light to initiate Phase 2, and you are going to wish to God that you had turned that gun on yourself before you ever pull me over." The massive screen abruptly snapped to pitch blackness, plunging Vance back into the terrifying silent dark as the heavy metal door behind him creaked open very slowly, and the sickening sound of sharpened metal dragging across concrete echoed through the room. The power of life and death over innocent people, because you wore a cheap piece of metal on your chest. Vance began to sob uncontrollably, the sound pathetic and weak drool mixing with salty tears, as he stared at the living ghost of his own arrogance. "Please, man, please, I am so sorry. I was wrong. Please, just tell them to stop hurting me," Vance pleaded, thrashing his chains wildly against the steel chair. Cole did not show an ounce of pity or forgiveness. He only showed the cold, ruthless calculation of a predator about to deliver the final fatal strike. "They are not going to stop," Vance Cole whispered, chillingly leaning closer to the hospital camera. "In fact, I just gave him the green light to initiate Phase 2, and you are going to wish to God that you had turned that gun on yourself before you ever pull me over." The massive screen abruptly snapped to pitch blackness, plunging Vance back into the terrifying silent dark as the heavy metal door behind him creaked open very slowly, and the sickening sound of sharpened metal dragging across concrete echoed through the room. The sound of heavy sharpened metal dragging slowly across the damp concrete floor was the only thing Greg Vance could hear in the pitch-black isolation of his underground cell. His fractured mind raced with terrifying possibilities as the footsteps drew closer and closer until he could feel the hot breath of his faceless tormentor on the back of his sweating neck. "Please just kill me," Vance whispered pathetically, his voice broken and raspy from hours of endless screaming. A gloved hand grabbed the back of his orange jumpsuit, yanking him backward against the solid steel chair. "You do not get to die today, Gregory," a low, ghostly voice murmured into his ear. "Phase 2 is not about physical pain. It is about erasing every single delusion you ever held about your pathetic existence." Suddenly, the harsh, blinding fluorescent light snapped back on revealing a small metallic cart positioned directly in front of Vance's chair. On the cart sat a dozen thick red binders, each one overflowing with glossy crime scene photos, coroner reports, and forged evidence logs. The operator stepped into Vance's field of vision, flipping open the first binder. "These are the files of every innocent person you and Chief Barrett ever framed, extorted, or destroyed," the operator stated coldly. "Every single false arrest, every single fabricated drug charge, every family you tore apart just to feed your sick little god complex." Vance squinted at the binder, recognizing the face of a young man he had planted narcotics on 5 years ago, just because the kid had dared to look at him the wrong way at a traffic light. "We are going to read every single page, Vance, and you are going to recite every single lie you ever told until your throat bleeds," the operator continued. "And if you stop reading, if you close your eyes for even a fraction of a second, we will go directly back to the deep water protocol. Do you understand me?" Vance nodded frantically, tears of absolute defeat streaming down his face. Hundreds of miles away at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole was pushing his recovering body to its absolute limits. Despite the agonizing protests of his shattered clavicle, he demanded to be helped out of bed and into a stiff-backed leather chair in the corner of his private recovery suite. He was not a man who could lie on his back while his brothers in arms waged war on his behalf. His door swung open, and General Arthur Miller entered the room accompanied by two high-ranking Pentagon analysts carrying encrypted tablets. "You should be resting," Marcus Miller grunted, though a faint glimmer of pride shone in his piercing eyes at the sight of his best commander sitting upright. "Rest is for the dead," General Cole replied, his voice steady despite the heavy dose of painkillers coursing through his veins. "Tell me what we have uncovered in the ashes of that miserable county." Miller pulled up a chair and motioned for the analysts to activate their tablets. The digital screens projected a massive tangled web of financial transactions, bank records, and classified offshore accounts onto the blank hospital wall. Chief Barrett and his men were not just corrupt local cops. Miller began his tone turning lethal and deadly serious. They were acting as a primary logistical hub for a massive international weapons smuggling cartel, using their police cruisers to transport illegal arms right across state lines because no one pulls over a cop. Cole leaned forward, his stoic face hardening into a sculpted mass of pure wrath. They were using federal highways to move guns under protection. A badge Cole rasped, his eyes blazing with disgust. "That is exactly why Vance panicked when he pulled me over, General. He thought my government vehicle was there to intercept one of their smuggling convoys." Miller nodded slowly, confirming the dark suspicion. "Bingo, Marcus. They were expecting a multi-million-dollar shipment of military-grade rifles that very night, and Vance was on perimeter duty. He saw your plates, he saw your rank, and his arrogant little pea brain decided to eliminate the threat rather than call it in. This is no longer just about a crooked cop shooting an officer, Marcus. This is a full-blown national security crisis, and we are going to exterminate every single rat involved in this cartel, starting from the bottom and climbing all the way to the top." Back in the shadowy depths of the black site, Chief Barrett was experiencing his own personal layer of purgatory. He was no longer chained to the wall. Instead, he was locked inside a tiny, suffocating plexiglass cube that was barely large enough for him to sit cross-legged. The cube was suspended by heavy steel cables over a massive echoing drop-off, a bottomless pitch black abyss deep beneath the mountain. Every time Barrett moved or shifted his heavy weight, the plexiglass cube would sway violently, sending sickening waves of vertigo crashing through his system. He was forced to stare down into the endless void, praying to a god he had long abandoned that the cables would hold. Suddenly, a crackling speaker inside the cube chirped to life, and General Miller's voice echoed to the terrifying confinement. "How is the view down there?" Chief Miller asked mockingly. Barrett clung pathetically to the smooth, clear walls of his prison, his fat fingers slipping on his own cold sweat. "Please, General, I will give you every single name in the cartel. I will tell you exactly where the weapons are hidden. Just pull me up," Barrett screamed, his voice echoing weakly down into the abyss. "I already have the names," Barrett Miller replied coldly. "I already have the bank accounts, and I already have the weapons because my Tier 1 team seized them 3 hours ago while you were sleeping. You have absolutely nothing left to bargain with. No power, no money, and no secrets. You are completely obsolete." Barrett began to cry, fat, salty tears splashing onto the clear floor beneath him. "What are you going to do to me?" he whimpered, sounding like a frightened infant. "I am going to leave you hanging there until you forget your own name," Miller stated with brutal finality. Meanwhile, in the Tactical Operations Command Center, the entire military machine was preparing to launch a coordinated hellfire strike on the remaining cartel leaders. Elite Black Hawk squadrons were fueled, and ready sniper teams were positioned on rooftops across 3 different states, and high-altitude surveillance drones locked onto their targets. The green light was waiting on one single man. General Miller walked back into Cole's hospital room and handed the wounded Colonel a red, encrypted command radio. "The board is set, Marcus, and the strike teams are holding on your mark," Miller said, stepping back and standing at strict attention out of pure respect for the living legend. Cole stared at the heavy red radio in his good right hand, feeling the immense weight of retribution coursing through his veins. He thought of Vance standing over him on that dark highway smirking as he bled. He thought of the innocent lives destroyed by Chief Barrett's corruption, and he thought of the Vance continue to read his endless binder of sins, his throat bleeding, his eyes swollen, completely unaware that the sick, corrupt world he once ruled was currently being vaporized in a storm of justified military wrath. Oath he took to protect his country from all, enemies foreign and domestic. Cole brought the radio to his lips, his eyes burning with a cold, unforgiving fire. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole," he said, his deep voice broadcasting directly into the earpieces of hundreds of Tier 1 operators across the nation. "Execute Operation Hellstorm, no mercy, no survivors. Burn it all to the dust." The confirmation beep echoed loudly in the sterile hospital room, signaling the beginning of the most ruthless synchronized military purge in the history of the nation. And down in the black site, Greg Vance continued to read his endless binder, sins his throat, bleeding, his eyes swollen, completely unaware that the sick, corrupt world he once ruled was currently being vaporized in a storm of justified military wrath. The synchronized execution of Operation Hellstorm began with a deafening series of concussive booms that rippled simultaneously across 3 different states. In a luxury penthouse high above the glittering skyline of Miami, the head of the international weapons smuggling cartel, a ruthless billionaire named Victor Sullivan, was sipping expensive scotch and counting his illicit profits. He never even heard the supersonic round that shattered his reinforced glass window. A Tier 1 military sniper position over 2,000 yards away on a crane had squeezed the trigger with ice-cold precision. The massive .50 caliber armor-piercing projectile tore through the bulletproof glass like tissue paper and struck Sullivan directly in the chest, launching his lifeless body backward over his mahogany desk in an explosion of red mist and shattered crystal. At that exact same second, in a dusty, abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of Atlanta, 24 heavily armed cartel enforcers were loading crates of illegal, fully automatic assault rifles into a fleet of unmarked delivery trucks. They thought they were invisible, protected by the crooked shield of Chief Barrett and his now destroyed police department. Suddenly, the entire roof of the warehouse caved in as 3 Black Hawk helicopters dropped massive breaching charges directly onto the corrugated steel. The resulting explosion blinded the enforcers and shot thick clouds of choking debris into the night air. Before the cartel thugs could even raise their stolen weapons, 40 elite Black Ops commandos fast roped down from the choppers through the smoking hole in the roof. They wore total night vision gear and moved with the relentless liquid efficiency of apex predators hunting helpless prey. Green lasers cut through the thick dust as suppressed gunfire dropped every single armed thug with deadly accurate double taps to the chest and head. No one was given the chance to surrender, and no one was read their Miranda rights because they were no longer dealing with law enforcement. They were facing the full, unrestrained wrath of the United States military. Back in the sterile recovery suite at Walter Reed Hospital, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole watched the carnage unfold in real time on 4 massive, encrypted tactical monitors set up by General Miller's staff. Despite the agonizing thumping pain in his shattered clavicle, a cold, grim satisfaction settled over Cole's sculpted face. He watched the heat signatures of the cartel operatives extinguish one by one on the drone feeds, like candles being blown out in a hurricane. "This is what happens when rats try to bite a lion," General Miller stated low and dangerously, standing directly behind Cole's chair with his arms crossed over his broad chest. "We have neutralized 70% of their distribution network in under 4 minutes, and we have secured enough stolen military hardware to arm a small country." Cole nodded slowly, his piercing eyes narrowing as he focused on a specific camera feed showing the deep underground black site. "Show me Vance," he ordered, his voice rough and gravelly. The center monitor instantly switched to the pitch-black interrogation room, where Greg Vance was still strapped to the solid steel chair. Vance had been reading from the thick red binders of his own sins for 4 straight hours. His once arrogant, prejudiced voice was now reduced to a pathetic gurgling whisper, his throat raw and bleeding from the relentless vocal strain. His eyes were swollen shut from weeping, and he was shaking uncontrollably in his damp orange jumpsuit, completely broken both physically and psychologically. The towering, faceless operative standing over him suddenly slammed the binder shut with a crack, like a whip, causing Vance to flinch so violently he nearly dislocated his own shackled wrists. "Please," Vance begged pathetically, his nose running over his chapped lips. "I cannot read anymore. I do not even know the words. They just look like black ants on the paper. Please, just let me sleep for 5 minutes." "You do not earn sleep, Gregory. You earn consequences," the operative whispered, grabbing the back of Vance's neck and forcing his swollen eyes toward a new digital screen that had just illuminated on a far concrete wall. Vance blinked through his tears, struggling to focus on the grainy green tinted night vision footage playing before him. He watched in paralyzing confusion and horror as elite military teams systematically destroyed cartel safe houses, blew up warehouses, and eliminated powerful criminal bosses. "Why are you showing me this?" Vance whimpered, coughing up a mouthful of phlegm. "Because you started this war, you ignorant little trash cop," General Miller's voice suddenly boomed through the hidden speakers in the room. "You thought you were protecting your pitiful little drug route when you shot Colonel Cole, but instead you handed us the exact thread we needed to unravel an entire global syndicate. Your greed, your prejudice, and your supreme stupidity have directly resulted in the total incineration of your entire criminal empire." Deep down in the terrifying abyss below, Vance's cell chief Barrett was still hanging helplessly in a suspended plexiglass cube dangling above the bottomless void. The fat, corrupt police chief had wet himself hours ago, his mind completely shattered by the vertigo and the crushing silence of his invisible grave. Suddenly, the massive steel winch holding his prison groaned loudly above him. The heavy cable snapped downward, dropping the plexiglass cube a terrifying 30 feet in freefall before catching with a bone-jarring crunch. Barrett screamed so loudly his vocal cords actually tore, thrashing wildly against the clear walls like a trapped insect. "Down here, there are no bribes, Chief Barrett, down here. There are no judges to buy and no evidence to lose," a cold metallic voice echoed from the darkness. "There is only the fall, and we control the rope." Back at the hospital, a sudden urgent beeping erupted from one of the classified intelligence terminals. A young Pentagon data analyst frantically typed on his keyboard, his face draining of all color, as he looked up at General Miller and Colonel Cole. "Sir, we have a massive complication," the analyst stammered, his voice trembling with pure panic. Before the cartel boss of Miami was neutralized, he initiated a dead man switch on a secure server. "A what?" Miller barked, striding toward the terminal with murderous intent. "An automated retaliation protocol," so the analyst explained, swallowing hard. "The server just broadcasted the exact GPS coordinates of this hospital, along with a $50 million open bounty on Colonel Cole's head, to every single underground mercenary cartel hit squad and rogue operative on the eastern seaboard. They are already converging on our position in massive numbers." Cole slowly gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles turning white as ice-cold adrenaline flooded his battered system. He looked at General Miller and saw the exact same lethal fire burning in the old commander's eyes. "They know where we are," Sir Cole whispered dangerously, a grim, predatory smile creeping across his scarred face despite the agony in his chest. Miller drew his heavy service sidearm from his hip holster and racked the slide with a deafening metallic clack that echoed to the hospital room. "Let them come," Miller replied, his voice like shaved granite. "Lock down every entrance, barricade the wings, and issue full combat gear to every Tier 1 operator in this facility, because if those mercenaries want to collect that bounty, they are going to have to walk through a river of their own blood to get to you." The heavy reinforced steel doors of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center slammed shut with a deafening metallic thud that echoed through the lobby like a massive bank vault ceiling shut. General Arthur Miller stood in the dead center of the makeshift command hub, his piercing eyes locked intently onto the glowing security monitors as the perimeter alarms began to shriek with bone-chilling intensity. They were no longer facing pathetic small-town corrupt cops or amateur street-level thugs. They were now facing the most ruthless, highly trained private military mercenaries that dirty money could buy, drawn by a staggering $50 million bounty placed on Marcus Cole's head. Outside the hospital perimeter, four matte black, heavily armored SUVs smashed violently through the main reinforced security gates, showering the wet asphalt in shattered concrete and twisted, jagged metal. Dozens of heavily armed assassins poured out of the vehicles like a swarm of lethal insects, wearing full tactical Kevlar body armor and carrying suppressed automatic weapons. They moved with flawless, lethal military precision, immediately severing the main underground power lines and plunging the entire massive medical wing into an eerie, flickering red emergency glow. Upstairs in the intensive care recovery suite, Colonel Cole ripped the remaining intravenous tubes directly from his good right arm, completely ignoring the searing white-hot agony shooting through his shattered collarbone and punctured lung. He rolled off the medical mattress, his bare feet hitting the cold linoleum floor with absolute lethal purpose. A young, terrified nurse rushed forward, trying desperately to push his massive frame back down, but Cole gently yet firmly brushed her aside. "You need to hide behind that reinforced nurse's station, and do not come out no matter What terrible things you hear happening outside this door, Cole instructed her, his voice a calm, deadly whisper that brooked no argument whatsoever. General Miller kicked the heavy wooden door open, tossing a fully loaded modified M4 tactical rifle and a heavy Kevlar vest directly onto Cole's empty bed. They have officially breached the first floor perimeter, Marcus Miller grunted, aggressively slapping a fresh extended magazine into his own heavy service pistol. The front lobby has turned into an absolute meat grinder, but my Tier 1 operators are currently holding the main stairwells. We have about 4 minutes before they reach this elevation. Cole carefully slid his good arm through the heavy tactical vest, letting it hang loosely over his thick, bloody bandages before grabbing the rifle with one hand and checking the holographic sights with practiced, deadly expertise. $50 million is a hell of a lot of money. To die for General Cole, said a grim, predatory smile hovering dangerously on his chapped lips. Let U.S. graciously teach these traitors exactly why the Pentagon thinks I am worth every single penny. Down in the terrifying, pitch-black abyss of the underground black site, the massive chaos erupting above ground was nothing but a distant, unnoticed rumble. But the psychological destruction of Greg Vance was finally reaching its absolute catastrophic climax. Vance was still strapped tightly to the freezing steel interrogation chair, his swollen, beaten eyes barely able to stay open after hours of relentless torment. The towering, faceless operative stepped out of the thick shadows, holding a small, encrypted digital tablet. "Welcome to Phase 3, Gregory," the operator whispered coldly, placing the glowing screen directly in front of Vance's sweating face. The screen displayed live high-definition security footage of Vance's own 2-story home back in his dusty little backwater town. Dozens of federal agents and windbreakers were carrying out heavy cardboard boxes of hidden files, seizing every single one of his bank accounts, and officially foreclosing on his mortgage. He watched in paralyzing silent horror as a national news reporter stood directly on his manicured lawn, broadcasting his fat face to the entire nation, branding him not just as a corrupt, pathetic cop, but as a high-level domestic terrorist directly colluding with a deadly international weapons cartel. "My family," Vance whimpered pathetically, his weak throat rattling. "What are you doing to my wife and daughter, you monsters? Your family is currently being relocated to a secure, undisclosed facility by federal marshals," the operator replied with zero emotion. "They have already been given entirely new identities, and your wife just signed a binding legal affidavit stating that Gregory Vance tragically died in a criminal firefight 3 days ago. You do not exist anymore, Gregory. Your name has been permanently erased from every government database on Earth. Your pension has been burned to ash, and your own daughter fully believes you are a dead traitor to your country." Vance let out a gut-wrenching, soul-crushing wail of pure primal agony, thrashing so violently against the solid steel chains that his wrists began to bleed profusely over the cold floor. The brief, fleeting physical pain of the cowardly bullet he had fired into Cole was absolutely nothing compared to this infinite torment. He was a living, breathing ghost trapped forever in hell, compelled to watch the entire world completely forget his miserable existence in real time. Deep down in the bottomless, echoing chasm, Chief Barrett still hung silently in a suspended plexiglass cube, the only sound being his own ragged, panic breathing and the ominous, sickening creaking of the thick steel cable holding his heavy weight just above the invisible void. Suddenly, a low, pulsing red warning light began to flash rapidly inside the tight, clear cube, bathing his fat, sweating face in a sinister glow. A cold, automated mechanical voice echoed to the small, confined plastic space, stating, firmly initiating automatic release protocol. "In 3 minutes, please prepare for deployment." Barrett screamed at the top of his lungs, pounding his bloody fists desperately against the unyielding plastic walls, until his knuckles cracked. "Please do not do this, please, God Almighty. Just pull me up. I will do anything. I will confess to everything. Just pull me up." But there was no answer from the darkness, only the relentless, merciless ticking of a digital red clock rapidly counting down his final remaining moments of frail sanity. Back at the war-torn hospital, the highly paid assassins had successfully broken to the very first line of military defense, leaving the lobby in absolute ruins. The sterile white corridors now echoed with the deafening roar of suppressed automatic weapons fire and the sickening shattering of heavy reinforced glass. A tactical team of 6 elite assassins wearing advanced 4-eye night vision goggles moved completely silently up the emergency concrete stairwell, their laser sights cutting through the thick smoke. They brutally kicked open a heavy steel fire door to the fourth floor, fully expecting to find a helpless veteran, wounded target waiting for an easy execution. Instead, they walked directly into total pitch blackness. Every single hallway light had been surgically shattered in advance. Before the highly paid lead mercenary could even adjust his goggles to the dark, blinding tactical military strobe light flashed brilliantly from the far end of the long hallway, instantly overloading and disorienting his expensive night vision equipment. Two suppressed shots rang out in perfect, deadly, rapid succession, and the lead mercenary dropped completely dead with two hollow-point bullets planted exactly between his eyes. Cole stepped out from the deep shadows, his stoic face a hard, sculpted, unforgiving mask of pure lethal concentration. He moved like a vengeful phantom, ignoring his shattered shoulder, firing with extreme precision, using only his right hand, and dropping two more lead assassins before they even realized they were being actively hunted. This was no longer a peaceful hospital corridor. It was a brutal kill zone, and Marcus Cole was the undisputed apex predator. The three remaining mercenaries dived desperately behind overturned heavy medical carts, laying down a massive blind hail of suppressive automatic fire that tore huge shredding chunks of white plaster from the walls. General Miller abruptly stepped out from an adjoining dark patient room, firing his heavy sidearm with ruthless accuracy, flanking the pinned assassins with flawless veteran tactics. "We need to move now," Marcus Miller shouted loudly over the deafening roar of the gunfire. The motion sensors show another 24 of these heavily armed bastards coming up the main freight elevator. Cole calmly reloaded his rifle with one hand, slamming the fresh heavy magazine hard against his own knee to lock it in place with a satisfying metallic click. "Let them ride it all the way up," General Cole said, coldly kicking open the wooden door to the nearby chemical storage closet and grabbing a thick bundle of C4 explosives. "Because I am about to blow that entire elevator shaft straight back to the bottom of hell." The heavy digital display above the freight elevator glowed in a menacing red flicker as the numbers slowly ticked upward, indicating the rapid ascent of 24 heavily armed cartel mercenaries. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole gritted his teeth against the searing white-hot pain in his shattered left shoulder as he expertly molded the thick gray plastic explosives around the main support beams of the elevator shaft using only his good right hand. He pressed the small electronic detonator firmly into the center of the C4 charge with a ruthless efficiency that only a Tier 1 operative possessed. General Arthur Miller stood guard at the end of the darkened corridor, his weapon raised, and ready, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled shadows for any surviving stragglers from the initial assault. The hospital lobby below was already a complete slaughterhouse, but these highly paid assassins were driven by the prospect of a $50 million payday, and they would not stop until they reached Cole's room. The elevator display chimed softly as it reached the third floor, just one level beneath them. "We have exactly 10 seconds before those doors open, and they flood this hallway like rats," Cole whispered, dangerously grabbing the remote detonator and backing away into the reinforced stairwell behind Miller. The heavy metallic grinding of the elevator gears echoed to the silent corridor, followed by the distinct sharp clack of automatic weapons being racked and loaded by the kill squad inside. The elevator door slid open with a smooth hiss, revealing a tightly packed squad of black-clad assassins wearing advanced tactical gear and level 4 body armor, their glowing night vision lenses scanning the darkness for their high-value target. They never even had the chance to step out of the car. Cole pressed the firing button on the remote detonator with zero hesitation and a cold predatory satisfaction. The resulting explosion was absolutely deafening, a massive concussive shockwave of blinding orange hellfire that ripped through the elevator shaft with apocalyptic force. The C4 shattered the reinforced concrete walls like fragile glass, instantly vaporizing the entire hit squad in a roaring inferno of thick black smoke and twisted burning metal. The main cable of the elevator snapped with a terrifying metallic shriek, sending the flaming wreckage, and the crisp remains of the assassins plummeting 4 stories straight down to crash violently into the hospital basement. The hospital floor shook violently under Cole's feet as the alarm shrieked, even louder, piercing through the thick dust cloud. "That takes care of the boarding party," General Miller stated calmly, wiping a smear of gray concrete dust from his face. "But we still have to deal with the cartel server broadcasting that bounty to every hitman on the planet." Cole nodded, his eyes locking onto a fallen mercenary's tactical communications radio laying on the floor amongst the rubble. He scooped it up and pressed the transmit button, knowing full well that the entire underground mercenary network was listening to this exact secure frequency. This is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole, the United States Army Tier 1 Special Operations. Cole rasped into the microphone, his deep voice dripping with lethal menace. To any trash assassin currently converging on this location, consider this your first and final warning. The squad you just sent up here is currently burning at the bottom of an elevator shaft. If you want to collect that $50 million bounty, come and get it, but know that every single one of you will die before you even see my face. He crushed the radio under his heavy tactical boot and looked up at Miller. We need to trace that server location and vaporize it before the next wave arrives, he demanded. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, deep down in the pitch-black subterranean black site, the automated red countdown clock inside Chief Barrett's plexiglass cube had reached its final terrifying seconds. The fat, corrupt police chief was sobbing hysterically, his voice completely gone, replaced by a pathetic squeaking sound as he clawed uselessly at the thick, smooth walls of his suspended prison. The red digital numbers flashed 321. A deafening mechanical clunk echoed from the massive steel winch above in the darkness. The heavy reinforced cable holding the cube completely disengaged and the box plummeted downward into a seemingly bottomless abyss. Barrett opened his mouth in a silent scream of pure heart-stopping terror as the vertigo ripped through his brain. He fell for what felt like an eternity, the wind rushing past the cube as he plunged into the unknown. But he did not hit the ground. Instead, the cube suddenly snapped to a violent halt, rattling his heavy bones, as it was caught by a secondary classified cable system designed explicitly for maximum psychological torture. The lights inside the cube turned a blinding, sterile white, revealing that he was now suspended only 3 feet above a massive pool of boiling industrial hydrochloric acid. The sickening acrid fumes bubbled just below his clear floor, melting the outer layer of the plastic and sending toxic vapors seeping into his tiny, confined space. An automated voice chirped again, stating coldly phase for initiated oxygen deprivation and toxic exposure protocol. Engage survival time estimated at 14 hours. May God have mercy on your soul. Bear began to cough violently as the acid fumes scorched his corrupt lungs, realizing with crushing despair that he was going to slowly melt from the inside out over a full day of unimaginable agony. In the cell block above him, Greg Vance was still strapped to his steel chair's orange jumpsuit, soaked in sweat and urine. His mind had completely snapped. He was muttering incoherently to himself, rocking back and forth, as much as the heavy iron chains would allow, repeating his old arrogant police codes over and over again like a broken record tape. The faceless operative watched him with zero pity. You have finally broken, Gregory, the operative whispered into the darkness, but we are not quite done yet, because now you are going to write letters of apology to every single innocent person you ever put behind bars, and you will write them in your own blood. The operative drew a small, sterile scalpel from his vest and stepped forward as Vance screamed a hoarse, gurgling scream that no one in the world would ever hear or care about. Back in the shattered hospital corridor, General Miller's classified, secure risk communicator beeped urgently. He tapped the screen, and the young Pentagon analyst's voice came through frantically. Sir, we have a trace on the Dead Man Bounty server, the analyst reported. It is not in a warehouse or a bunker. It is hosted on a heavily armed private luxury yacht currently cruising through international waters just off the coast of Florida, and it is heavily guarded by the cartel's elite personal army, the remains of their top-tier sicarios who survived our initial Nightfall purge. Miller looked at Cole, his hard eyes glinting with lethal determination. You heard the man, Marcus. We have a yacht to sink, Miller grunted, tightening the straps on his Kevlar vest. Cole slowly rolled his shoulders, ignoring the blood seeping through his heavy bandages, and racked a suppressed rifle with one steady, unbreakable hand. Get me a secure helicopter transport directly to that coastline right now, General Cole demanded, his voice deadly and uncompromising as he stared into the smoking corridor. I am going to board that floating fortress myself, and I am going to feed that bounty server and every single remaining cartel guard on that ship directly to the predators of the ocean, because nobody puts a price on my head and lives to see the sunrise. Single innocent person you ever put behind bars, and you will write them in your own blood. The operative drew a small, sterile scalpel from his vest and stepped forward as Vance screamed a hoarse, gurgling scream that no one in the world would ever hear or care about. Back in the shattered hospital corridor, General Miller's classified, secure risk communicator beeped urgently. He tapped the screen, and the young Pentagon analyst's voice came through frantically. "Sir, we have a trace on the Dead Man Bounty server," the analyst reported. "It is not in a warehouse or a bunker. It is hosted on a heavily armed private luxury yacht currently cruising through international waters just off the coast of Florida, and it is heavily guarded by the cartel's elite personal army, the remains of their top-tier sicarios who survived our initial Nightfall purge." Miller looked at Cole, his hard eyes glinting with lethal determination. "You heard the man, Marcus. We have a yacht to sink," Miller grunted, tightening the straps on his Kevlar vest. Cole slowly rolled his shoulders, ignoring the blood seeping through his heavy bandages, and racked a suppressed rifle with one steady, unbreakable hand. "Get me a secure helicopter transport directly to that coastline right now, General Cole," demanded, his voice deadly and uncompromising as he stared into the smoking corridor. "I am going aboard that floating fortress myself, and I am going to feed that bounty server and every single remaining cartel guard on that ship directly to the predators of the ocean, because nobody puts a price on my head and lives to see the sunrise." The massive overpressurized pipe ruptured with an ear-splitting screech. A gigantic cloud of superheated, blinding white steam exploded downward, enveloping the 7-foot giant in a fraction of a second. The Russian dropped his heavy machine gun and screamed in pure bone-melting agony as the scalding vapor cooked him alive inside his own thick metal armor, turning his impenetrable suit into a boiling copper oven. Cole stepped out from the shadows, watching the cartel's strongest monster collapse to the grating as a twitching, steaming mess. Cole walked right past the dying mercenary and approached the glowing server rack, pulling out a secure, encrypted radio. "General Miller, the bounty server is secured, and the engine room is cleared," Cole reported, breathing heavily as he prepared to smash the hard drives with the butt of his rifle. But before Miller could respond, a chilling mechanical voice echoed from the server itself. "Unauthorized access detected. Critical failsafe. Initiated detonating yacht scuttle charges in 60 seconds. The deafening alarms blared through every corridor of the massive vessel as the heavy reinforced steel blast doors of the engine room began to slide shut, automatically locking Cole inside the burning compartment with a dead Russian mercenary and the blinking dead man switch server. Cole's blood ran cold as massive red emergency lights began flashing frantically across the entire ship. Sinking to the bottom of the ocean was never part of the plan. The heavy reinforced steel blast doors slid shut with a final deafening metallic clang that shook the entire floor of the burning engine room, locking Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cole inside a floating steel coffin. The mechanical voice repeated its deadly countdown, chirping coldly 50 seconds until total vessel scuttle protocol and hull detonation. Red emergency lights spun frantically, bathing the room in a sinister, hellish glow as thick white scalding steam continued to pour from the ruptured pipes, hissing loudly over the twitching, crisp body of the dead Russian mercenary. Cole did not panic because Tier 1 operators were surgically trained to view panic as a fatal disease. He knew he had exactly 45 seconds to destroy the bounty server and find an exit before the massive C4 charges lining the hull blew this billion-dollar yacht into a million pieces, a jagged shrapnel at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. He grabbed his rifle with his good right hand, ignoring the searing, throbbing agony in his shattered clavicle, and smashed the heavy steel, but directly into the glowing glass face of the server rack. The glass shattered into 1,000 tiny, glittering shards. Cole tore out the massive hard drives containing the $50 million bounty protocol and the cartel's remaining global financial accounts and smashed them mercilessly against the metal floor grating until they were nothing but twisted plastic and sparking wires. The worldwide hit on his head was officially and permanently canceled. 30 seconds to detonation, the automated voice stated, its tone entirely devoid of mercy. Cole spun around, scanning the room for any conceivable escape route. The main elevator was dead, and the reinforced blast doors required a digital key code he did not have, but his piercing eyes locked onto a massive heavy industrial winch hanging directly over the roaring ship's diesel engines, connected to a heavy maintenance hatch on the ceiling designed for removing engine parts. Cole sprinted across the slick grating, his combat boots slipping on the Russian mercenary's blood, and jumped onto the massive churning diesel engine block to reach the winch. The heat radiating from the engine was absolutely blistering, searing through his Kevlar vest as he grabbed the heavy steel hook with his bare right hand. 20 seconds to hull detonation. General Miller's voice suddenly crackled frantically over Cole's earpiece, sounding almost desperate for the very first time in his life. Marcus, you need to get out of there right now. The radar shows the ship is going critical. I am positioning the Black Hawk directly over the smokestacks, but I cannot wait forever. Marcus, you have to breach that deck. Cole wrapped the winch cable tightly around his forearm, gritting his teeth. So hard, he tasted blood. I am taking the express route up, General. Make sure you leave the light on. Cole yelled back over the radio. He drew his heavy-duty service sidearm, aimed point-blank at the electronic locking mechanism of the ceiling hatch, and emptied his entire magazine into the digital pad. The metal shattered in a blinding shower of electrical sparks, weakening the thick bolts holding it shut. 10 seconds to detonation. Cole pressed the emergency winch override button, sending the heavy steel cable retracting upward at maximum violent speed. The massive force ripped his body off the engine block, hurtling him straight up toward the ceiling. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep down in the bowels of the classified black site, the apocalyptic conclusion was simultaneously being delivered. The corrosive hydrochloric fumes had finally eaten completely through the thin plexiglass floor of Chief Barrett's suspended cube. With a sickening crunch, the plastic gave way entirely, and the corrupt mastermind plummeted into the vat of boiling chemical acid below. His final pathetic scream was instantly cut short as he was completely dissolved into nothingness, leaving no bones, no trace, and absolutely no memory of the sick empire he had built on the suffering of innocent lives. In the dark interrogation cell above, the faceless Tier 1 operative silently packed away the bloody apology letters Vance had written until his fingers bled to the bone. Vance was curled in a tight fetal position on the freezing concrete, completely catatonic, staring blankly into the void. He would spend the rest of his natural life in this windowless tomb, a forgotten ghost erased from human history, forever paying for his ignorant prejudice every single second of every single day until his heart finally stopped beating. Back on the heaving ocean, the yacht's hull scuttle charges detonated with an apocalyptic bone-shattering roar that split the massive billion-dollar vessel entirely in half. A gigantic pillar of blinding orange hellfire erupted from the depths of the ship, tearing through all 4 luxury decks and launching thousands of tons of twisted burning metal directly into the hurricane storm. The explosion blew the weakened maintenance hatch clean off its hinges, launching Cole out of the burning engineering bay, riding the winch cable like a bullet surfing on a wave of pure fire. He burst to the shattered upper deck just as the ship began to rapidly sink beneath the churning black waves. The massive military Black Hawk helicopter was hovering expertly just 10 feet above the raging inferno, battling the hurricane winds. General Miller leaned out the open side door, reaching down into the blinding smoke with a heavy rope ladder. Cole released the burning winch cable and lunged desperately for the ladder, catching the bottom rung with his right hand, just as the entire yacht imploded beneath him, getting sucked down into the unforgiving, freezing depths of the Atlantic Ocean. General Miller grabbed Cole's tactical harness, and with a massive heave, pulled the wounded, bleeding hero up and onto the safe metal floor of the helicopter cabin. The pilot immediately banked sharply, pulling the chopper up and away from the sinking wreckage into the relative safety of the stormy night sky. Cole lay flat on his back, staring up at the metal ceiling, breathing heavily as the freezing rain washed the soot and blood from his scarred face. His shattered collarbone was completely destroyed and his body was pushed to the absolute brink of human endurance, but his piercing eyes were clear and sharp. The weapons cartel was completely vaporized, the bounty was erased, and the corrupt cops who started it all were either melted to ash or locked away in a lightless purgatory never to be seen or heard from again. Operation Hellstorm was an absolute flawless success, demonstrating exactly what happens when arrogant criminals dare to provoke the full, unrestrained, and merciless wrath of the United States Armed Forces. General Miller sat down on the jump seat across from Cole and handed him a canteen of water, a rare look of deep, genuine pride resting on his weathered face. "It is finally over," Marcus Miller stated quietly, his gravelly voice barely audible over the chopping rotors. "The rats have been exterminated and the poison has been sucked dry from that backwater county. You can finally rest, Colonel." Cole took a long, slow drink from the canteen and sat up, very slowly, wincing to the agony as he looked out the open door at the endless black ocean below them. He knew there would always be another mission, another target, and another threat lurking in the shadows of the world. Tier 1 operatives did not get fairy tale endings. They only got the grim, lethal satisfaction of knowing they were the unseen apex predators, keeping the wolves at bay. Cole handed the canteen back to General Miller and cracked a dark, exhausted smile. "We never rest, General Cole," whispered his voice cold and steady as the helicopter disappeared into the thick black clouds, heading back to the shadows from whence they came. "We just reload." The chopper blade sliced through a thunderstorm, carrying the ghostly heroes away from the destruction they had written on the waves. The world below would never truly know how close it came to darkness, but the Pentagon would always remember the deadly sacrifice and the unyielding discipline of the man they call their apex predator.
Evidence is now
No mercy was
declassified.
given, and none was ever
Did these
required
corrupt
when
cops
justice
get
was
exactly
executed
what
from the
they deserve?
shadows.
Subscribe for more.